And in fact, I've entitled it In the Godly Home. And we're going to, this morning is just kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Introduction. That's what I was looking for. This is the introduction. And I've entitled it Choices. If you want to put something in your notes, but it's In the Godly Home. Turn to Psalm 127, verse 1. Now, I'm going to tell you there's a reason why the Bible says that the aged women are to teach the younger women. There's a reason why it says aged women, because it's not till after you've done it that you realize all the mistakes and you realize all the shortcomings, and now you can speak as an authority on it because you've been through it. But I can tell you this, if you're not going to try to find out from somebody else, you are going to make those same mistakes. You are bound to it. And that's the reason why what I'm getting you is not what I did, because I missed half of it. I mean, I missed half the stuff I should have been doing with my family and my children, and mainly because didn't have a lot of people at that time that knew how. We were like first generation Christians. And there wasn't a lot of women around that had raised families, and so, and I probably wouldn't have, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have took it to heart, maybe I would have, I don't know. But in Psalm 127, verse 1, this is just a verse I picked out to kind of kick off this series. It says, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. Now you need to see something about that is somebody is building that house. Okay? You're going to build a house. Whether it's going to be any good or not is if God is in it. And I can tell you this, I've seen many a Christian build a house and God was nowhere near it. And man, it was horrible. Because except the Lord build the house. In other words, you're laboring, but God is the one that's building the house. And we're going to see this all centers around that anyway. The godly home. Well, first thing is it's not a facade. Facade is an appearance of something. It's a fake front. It looks good, but it's not solid. Okay, that's a facade. I can't think of a better word. You think of a better word? Huh? Potemkin Village. Oh, just the front? Okay. Like Rock City also, that's a facade. It's not really the real thing. It's for everybody to see, but for nobody to really examine. And I'll tell you, that is a temptation. It's a temptation in churches because we're going to make our family look right, but it's not going to be right. Because if the Lord's not in it, you can put up all the fakery you want, all the glimmer and glamour you want. Time will prove that thing out for you, and there's no way around it. You just can't get away from it. So it's not a facade. It is mom and dad loving the Lord. I just sum it up. Mom and dad loving the Lord. And the only way you can love the Lord is love the Bible. You say, well, I love the Lord, but I don't read my Bible. I question your love for the Lord. Because the only thing you know about God came from this book. Everything we know about Him comes from this book. How can we say we love Him and then we don't spend time in it? You spend time with what you love. And if mom and dad love the Lord, listen, you could even make mistakes and somehow God He has a way of bringing that thing out, because we're going to make mistakes. But if God's in the thing, if the Lord build the house, okay, but if He doesn't, you're laboring in vain. It's not sinless. There are plenty of mistakes and trespasses will be made, but keeping the Lord in it is key. Keeping the Lord in it is key. You say, well, the godly home is peaceful and quiet. No, it's not. If your home is peaceful and quiet, one of three things. Number one, you have no children. Okay? Number two, you only have one child. Because if you add another one, I promise you, the chaos is exponential with every child. We stopped at 2. Okay? That was enough chaos for me. Well, we actually didn't stop. The Lord only gave us 2. and or you're deaf. That's the only way it's quiet in your home. Okay. It's not about being sinless. It's not about everything being orderly, because if you have a family, it's going to be disorderly. There's going to be a lot of disorder involved. That doesn't mean the Lord's not in it. Okay. It's not about standards. Even though there's going to be a lot of standards, it's not about standards. It's about the Lord. Everything should always point toward Him, because what you're wanting is, you're wanting the child to switch from you to the Lord. That's your goal, okay? And I'll talk more about that. But it's really not about standards. You have to have standards, but standards alone won't do. I know plenty of Christian families that had very stringent, tight standards, and their kids turned out horrible. Because standards by themselves mean absolutely nothing. The reason why somebody won't adhere to a standard is because they don't believe it's good for them. When I got saved, nobody really got on me about my hair, my necklace, my poofy shirts. Yeah, hard to believe, isn't it? Okay. Well, now the Institute did get on me. I showed up with a poofy shirt, a necklace around my neck. It was a cross, though. Hey, had a cross on. Okay. And I had feathered back hair. Next thing you know, I come in, they hand me this page of rules that says no feathered back hair, no crosses, and no poofy shirts. I'm serious, man. It was written right for me. And I knew exactly what it was. You say, well, the Lord convicted me about my hair. I've had the same haircut with less hair. I've had the same haircut for just about my entire Christian life. Why? Because God told me to. And as far as the correction in what I wore, I thought, well, if that's not acceptable, I'll wear what's acceptable. That's the way I've always looked at it. But it's not about standard. What was concerning to me is, are you pleased with this? If you're pleased with it, then fine. And I've got no reason to change it. He's never said you need to change your haircut. I'm getting tired of it. Okay? He's never said that to me. So I just go with this. The godly home is determined by choices of the parents. It is a choice to have a godly home. Because it's not about some, where you walk in and there's, you hear the om. And if that were it, you would never hear om in my house, That's not what it's about. But I will say this, you only have one shot at this. For every kid you have, you got one shot at it. You get it wrong, or you don't do it right, you'll pay. You'll pay. And it doesn't matter who you are. And to the extent that you don't do it right, you pay. And what you don't want to happen is, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So it's determined by the choices of the parents. Look at Joshua chapter 24, verse 15. Now, I'm not going to try to rush through this. I go too quickly through a lot of things, but we'll take our time and go through this. Joshua 24:15. And Joshua said this, "And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." It's a choice. You make up your mind, okay, I'm going to do it God's way. I'm going to do it God's way. A godly home is a battleground of wills. Okay? You thinking that your children are not as stubborn as you is a mistake. Okay? I'm just telling you straight up, it's a mistake. You may find out they're twice as stubborn as you. You don't know. But I'm telling you, it is a battleground of wills. Okay? And I want to make something, I looked up in the Bible. I don't believe in breaking the will or breaking the spirit of a child. I think that's wrong. I don't see it anywhere in Scripture about breaking their spirit. You break the spirit of a horse, anybody could ride that horse. Some of the greatest preachers on this planet were very spirited. Okay? They still had their spirit about them. Now, God has to discipline them any way he wants, but I think of Jack Wood. Jack Wood wasn't broke. I can tell you that. And he's kind of a wild spirit. Greg Eastep wasn't broke either. He was kind of a wild spirit at times. But the most spirited men usually had the greatest effect when they were in line with God. That's what I'm trying to get. Spirited to the wrong thing, yeah, bad news. Spirited to the right thing, good news. So I don't think you need to, break your kids down to where they're practically servants. I don't think that's necessary. I think what you need to do is just mold that will, okay? Guide that will. And we'll get into all that. But a godly home is a battleground. The problem with the godly home is a decision has to be made, and pathetic parents, I'm just going to be very blunt, pathetic parents will decide not to decide. And they'll fail miserably. See, sometimes we just don't decide to do it. And when we don't decide to do it, it's a decision has been made. If you don't decide to be saved, what are you? You're lost, and you're on your way to hell. You made a decision, even in your indecision. And the godly home's the same way. When you don't decide, listen, we got to do it this way. We got to obey God in this. We got to try to do this thing right. And when you don't make that decision, you've already made even if you don't, you just want to just not think about it. He said there in Matthew chapter 12, verse 30, he that is not with me is against me. Well, I know a lot of people that aren't against God. But they're not with him either. And he said, well, if you're not with me, you're against me. And he that gathereth not with me scattereth abroad. See, by not doing it, he says you're scattering. By not being with him, you're against him. And I'm saying by not making the choice, well, you can forget about the godly home. One thing about children, and this is something that most Christians are, I don't know how, they're not reading the same book I'm reading or something. They're totally blind to this. But they believe that there's good in their children. They see that little baby and they say, oh, look how good. Oh. Bible says it comes out of the womb speaking lies. Do you realize that all the potential for evil is already in your child? All the potential. I mean, it can lie, it can want things, covet things, it can steal stuff. I mean, it's all built in, man, in that sin nature, and it's already in there. All the potential for evil is right there in front of you. You don't have to teach them nothing. But every good quality has to be instilled. Every one of them. And if you think that's going to happen by osmosis, you're wrong. If you think somehow that, all of a sudden they're just going to awaken one day and have good qualities, forget it. They're not. And if you show me that, I'll show you the exception to the rule around the world. Because that is the exception to the rule. Anything that's good has to be instilled. Now, I'm not saying that God can't come along, but I'm telling you, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I will fight to the day of my death with what's in my head and what's in my heart and the way I was raised. It just will not be that caliber that it could have been. And I know that. So, there's ramifications of your choices. Look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. And he says, thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. You see that? He mentions 4 generations there. But turn to Deuteronomy 24:16. Keep that one in your hand. Turn to Deuteronomy 24:16. And we find a contradictory verse. Seems to contradict. And it says in Deuteronomy 24:16, the fathers shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. And then in 2 Kings 14:6, it says, but the children of the murderers he slew not, according unto that which is written in the book of the law of Moses, wherein the Lord commanded, saying, the father shall not be put to death for the children, nor the children be put to death for the fathers, but every man shall be put to death for his own sin. But then why is he talking about in Exodus 20 verse 5 that he's going to visit these children to the third and fourth generation? I can tell you why. Because the idolatry went right with them down through that generation for up to 4 generations. What you do has an impact. If you decide not to have a godly home, you could be affecting 3 and 4 generations down the road, maybe even longer. That's the importance of this. There was no godly generation or godly home when I got saved. I was like just one picked out of the family that God saved. And it should start with me. It should start with me. The godly home. And trust me, I had no clue. I know more today about what a godly home should be than when I was supposed to have one. I wish I did. But some of you, you were raised in a Christian home or raised in even a godly home. You should know. You should know these things. You should know what's required of you or what you should do. So the impact of idolatry could carry on for 3 and 4 generations. And he says, because he says there, 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me. And worshiping a false god, it's hating God. And that was the problem. It wasn't just the parents doing it, it's the children were following the example. You know what they say? What parents do in moderation, the children do in excess. That is very true. So whatever you're moderate in, your kids could be just extreme in. There's another saying, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. Everybody's bent some way, but how much? And you got to consider, your children look at you and they seem to just explode. And the very things that you are moderately flawed in, they perfect those flaws. There's a verse, I'm going to apply it to this. It's in Matthew 23:15. And it says, woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye compass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, ye make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. We have the ability to do that. We can make our children so far worse than we were just by not having a godly home, by not making that choice. Ultimately, you want your children to be better than you. Absolutely, positively, 100% better than you in every aspect. Okay? Not sinless, but better. And we'll get into that. There's a few things that are critical that we're going to talk about in the weeks to come, that if you don't instill this in this child, you have just guaranteed their destruction. Let's talk about Lot for a second. And this is just preliminary. We'll probably get into him a little bit more deeper. But Lot's choices decimated his family. Yet he was saved. You didn't know it till the New Testament. You didn't know it till Peter wrote about it that he was even saved. Because you couldn't have figured it out from reading it in Genesis. I can tell you that. But Lot was saved. Look at 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2 and look at verse 7 and 8. Second Peter 2 verse 7 and 8, and delivered just Lot. Okay? Now he's not saying just Lot because he did happen to save 2 daughters with him, right? And well, the wife kind of got lost along the way. But he's not saying that. He's saying the word just. He's just. He's justified. Aren't you justified this morning? But you can still be a Lot, can't you? And delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man, go back there and read his life. You can't find one decision other than he believed on the Lord. You can't find one decision that Lot ever made in his entire life that was right. Not one. He didn't make one good decision. For that righteous man dwelling among them in seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. You see, Lot made a decision. Now, it wasn't just to decide to move to the city of Sodom. I don't think he actually moved to the city. I think he moved to where he saw that the grazing was good, and he got close, and then he ended up living in the city. It was a progression. But I'll tell you what Lot did. Lot abandoned his family to the world. He abandoned them while he himself was saved. He abandoned them to use and abuse, and he never left the home. He didn't have to. You can abandon them right in place. You don't have to abandon your wife or abandon your husband to abandon your children. You can do it sitting right there at the kitchen table. The man was selfish, covetous, but worst of all, he was a spiritual recluse. The reason I understand that is because I tend to be that way. It was very hard for me to open up, be open about my relationship with the Lord with other people. My prayer time is my prayer time with God. I still have the hardest time. Her and I pray some together, but most of the time we don't. We pray separately. And I can understand him being a spiritual recluse. And it's got to be something that's guarded against it. Your children need to see your relationship with God. And I know sometimes we think, it takes quite a bit just to get over the fleshly embarrassment of praying over your food at a restaurant, okay? Now you're going to be praying in front of your kids and your wife. Or they might walk into the room and you're on your knees praying and you don't get up real quick because you hear them coming. That's because you want to be a spiritual recluse. But the problem with that is that's exactly what Lot was. Because he knew who the Lord was. When the angel showed up and said, God's going to burn this place to a fare thee well, all of a sudden Lot's Mr. Spiritual, man. We got to do something. Got to rescue the family. A little late. Because they don't even know what you're talking about. Look what he says there. Turn to Genesis 19, verse 14. Genesis 19, verse 14. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. He's exaggerating. He's ridiculing. You know why they didn't take him seriously? Because they had never seen this part of Lot their entire lives. And now all of a sudden it's critical time. Time to get saved, son. Time to get saved, daughter. Look at you and laugh. What are you talking about? There's 3 stages in my mind. A lot of this stuff I just made up. So if you don't agree with it, that's fine. Just something I think about. I think there are 3 stages to your children. Number 1, to a child, you are infallible. And you are God. Remember what he said? The Lord said to Moses, Aaron shall be unto you as a mouth, and ye shall be unto him as God. There's a lot of truth in that. A lot of truth in that with a baby Christian. A baby Christian comes into a church. and the pastor becomes God. He does, for a time, okay? And if that pastor's got any sense, he will have that sinner move on, okay? And put somebody else in front of him and on that pedestal, okay? Because we all fall off that pedestal if we're not careful. But to a child, you're infallible. You're God. He doesn't know God yet. He knows you, okay? And then they become a teenager, and you went from infallible to where you cannot do right. You can't do nothing right. Everything you do is wrong. You are just wrong. You're wrong about everything. That's usually a teenager, okay? And then there's an adult child, okay? And they either revere you because they look back and say, Mom and Dad did it right. I was just a rebel. And you turn out okay, so they revere you, or they hate you. That's it. They either revere you or they hate you. And that's just the way that thing falls out. Lot's choices destroyed his family. Hannah's choices produced a Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. And I got something out of this I had never seen before. I don't know if I'll get to it today, but 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. She said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. You see, what Hannah did was she ended up giving him to God. Now, God gave him to her, and then she gave him to God. You see, that's exactly what you're trying to do. You're going to have to give this child to God. And this child's going to have to be arms wide open when you introduce him. And if you'll follow the parental laws of how to raise a child, that should happen. Should happen on, it says, and he worshiped the Lord. He didn't even know the Lord, and he was worshiping the Lord. Why? Hannah's raised him right. And Hannah knows who he ultimately belongs to. He doesn't belong to you, Mom. If your children are saved, they're already bought with a price. And they're not their own. And if they're not saved, well, they need to be, right? The ultimate thing is they end up belonging to God anyway. And she was just glad that she got the child long enough to wean him. Yeah. And then it became time for him to go. She said, go. You belong to God. Good parenting does not get passed down just because you were raised right. Okay? Eli was a man who loved God but failed his children. You look at how Eli is with God. He loves God. He loves the service of God. I mean, he's the one that fell backwards and broke his neck when they found out they took the ark. He was less upset about that than his two kids getting killed. He loved the things of God, but he also neglected his family because of that. And you can't do that. 1 Samuel chapter 3, look at verse 12 to 14 there. It said, in that day, 1 Samuel 3:12, in that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him, okay, it's not like the Lord didn't tell him, I have told him that I would judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth. Not that he did, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever. It says that his sons are the sons of Belial. That means it says they did not know the Lord. They perished. And they're with one of the godliest men in the nation. They're living in his house. And they perished. Just because you were raised right doesn't mean you're going to raise your kids right like it's some genetic pass down. It doesn't happen that way. It takes effort. Now turn to 1 Samuel chapter 8, and I'm not going to go long because we've got a lot to do today. And I want you to look at this one. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 1 to 3. Samuel, okay, remember the one that Hannah raised? Samuel turned right around after witnessing God's judgment on Eli's house, produced 2 sons that were not much better than Hophni and Phinehas. It says in 1 Samuel 8, verse 1 to 3, and it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel. The name of his second was Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre. That's filthy money for its gain. After lucre, and took bribes and perverted judgment. Now, it doesn't say they didn't know the Lord, though. We're talking a step up. We're talking a step up of you got your kids saved. And that's it. And they turned out rotten. Rotten Christians. Not sons of Belial. They're saved. They're going to glory. They're just rotten kids. Didn't turn out. And that's from a man that was raised right. That's from a man that, one of the greatest prophets in the Bible. And his 2 kids can be trusted in the ministry. A godly home is a battleground of wills and a place where sinners live. That's what a godly home is. For those of us who were not raised in church, I could produce better kids than myself just by showing up for church. I mean, there's no pat on the back. My kids were going to be better than me just because we raised them in church where they could be exposed to the Word of God, and they got saved early. Okay? I mean, that was a step up. The greater challenge is my children who were raised in church, who were saved at an early age, now to raise their children. It wasn't too hard for me. I mean, think about it. Okay, and I'm going to stop with this. When you're saved before you are 10 and know more Bible at age 15 than your father knew at age 30, just raising them in church will only get you Samuel's kids. That's it. It's only going to get you Samuel's kids. Choosing to follow God's prescribed laws of parenting will produce the right fruit. So I was saved at 16. The die is already cast. Okay? However rotten I am then, I'm that rotten now. However poor of a character I had then, I have now. Now, I may have disciplined myself to overcome some of that, but I'm telling you, there's something in that book that talks about the spirit of a man and not being able to control that thing. And it's absolutely terrifying to me because it just leaves you no hope. We'll get into that. There's no way that I can teach this subject without getting really personal. There's just no way. And I think it's best to we'll just tear the Band-Aid off, and the scab and everything, and just let her bleed. And just figure out what you can do. Okay? I'm going to give you some answers. I'm going to give you some things that help. A lot of it's, a lot of everything. Just having a little faith and being consistent. Being consistent. That matters. But there are some things. I mean, we're going to talk about the things that go into good parenting in the godly home. Obviously, the Lord has got to be in the middle of all of it. Okay? And see, here's the thing. By the time you figure out what you're supposed to do, they're grown. Isn't that the way it is? So that's what I'm trying to tell you now. That's what I'm trying to tell you now, that you need to listen to what the Scriptures have to say and what you need to do. Okay? There's a verse over there, it talks about, it says, spare not for their crying. You're going to tend to want to be lenient. You're going to tend to want to overlook. And I'm not talking about spanking or punishment necessarily, but you're going to want to tend to excuse your child because it's yours. It's better than all the rest. It's yours. And you're going to tend to want to excuse them, and I would not. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about you can't show them mercy. Obviously you do, but I'm just saying that you just tend to overlook their shortcomings and their flaws, and you don't realize that those flaws are going to get magnified 10 times over. You don't want to produce a child that has your weaknesses expounded or blown up. You do not. And that's exactly what this entire generation has produced. For the one thing is that if you think they're going to come out of church because you taught them standards and you taught them to do this and you taught them to do that, you're wrong. If they don't love God, they won't follow it. What you want is to raise a child that'll love God. That's what you want. Everything else is, forget about it. They will do exactly what God wants. If they love Him, they'll do exactly what He wants them to do their whole life. Oh, they'll fall on the ground and get back, but they're not going to absolutely explode on you and become something you're like, you know, atheist, homosexual. I mean, it happens in Christian homes. You don't want that to happen. Okay, got to stop. Any questions about what we covered? None of you will be here next week, right? Try to show up for this, okay?